welcome back to another U.S. immigration law video. Today we will be talking the real ID requirement that goes into effect today, May 7th, 2025. And I just traveled by airplane, and when I was boarding my flight and I was out of the continental United States, the TSA agents reminded us reminding passengers coming into the United States of the real ID requirement that would go into effect today. And they were actually telling people whether or not the ID they were presenting was real ID compliant and whether or not they would need one in the future. And a lot of people have a real ID and they don't even know it. I have several actually. The real ID can be presented in several different ways. There are many different documents that meet the real ID requirement. If you have a passport, for example, your valid passport meets the real ID requirement, can be used for travel inside the United States and internationally. Also, if you have a driver's license, and that driver's license, at least here in the United States, will have either an American flag in the corner or a gold star on it, that is a compliant real ID. Also, if you have multiple other different types of documentation, such as a Nexus card that we see often here in Western New York, within people traveling back and forth through Canada, those Nexus cards are real ID compliant, as well as passport cards. And there are government IDs that are acceptable real ID cards. If you are a U.S. green card holder, that is a real ID and that meets the requirements. If you have a border crossing card, that is real ID compliant. And also, if you are a member of an international or a tribe, an Indian tribe, and have an enhanced tribal ID, that is real ID compliant. So there are many different documents that meet the real ID requirements. The important thing is to understand this goes into effect today, May 7th. So verify with TSA whether or not the ID that you are carrying or traveling with is real ID compliant. Now, if you don't have it, the TSA said that they are offering some leniency right now as people get compliant IDs. And what it could mean is a significant delay in your travel to the United States as they verify your identification. And that's the purpose behind the real ID requirement, is to verify that the person carrying that ID is actually the person on the ID. For security reasons and other reasons, the real ID went into effect. Now, the real ID law was passed 20 years ago, and it's taken this long for it to be implemented. It's been delayed and delayed and delayed, and it's finally going into effect. Now, another question that we receive with immigration is if you have a pending green card and you do not have a real ID, or maybe you have questions about traveling in the United States with a pending green card. Well, what can you use? Well, if you don't have a real ID compliant license or ID, TSA again will accept several alternatives forms of identification for domestic travel. Now, this is important. This is for domestic travel inside the United States. If you're pending adjustment of status, if you're getting that green card through marriage to a U.S. citizen, for example, and you are doing so inside the United States, be aware you cannot travel outside of the United States, no international travel, unless you have authorization to do so. But if you are traveling inside the United States, then it's important to understand what documents you can use to travel within the United States while you're pending adjustment of status to meet this real ID compliant document rule that goes into effect today. So you can use your unexpired passport, you can use an unexpired employment authorization document or your EAD card, you can use an unexpired green card, DHS trusted traveler card, just such as I mentioned, such as the Nexus card, a U.S. passport or passport card, or an enhanced driver's license from certain states such as New York, the ones that have the American flag in the corner. Those all meet the real ID requirement. Now, also, if you are traveling and you have a pending adjustment, in addition to those documents, you should carry proof of your filing with the U.S. government. So you should carry a copy of your notice of action, your I-797 notice of action, showing that you have a pending adjustment of status application in the United States. These are all proof of your lawful presence in the United States while you're awaiting that green card to be issued. And you should be traveling with these documents under this new Real ID requirement to avoid any delays and issues. Now, if you don't travel with Real ID compliant document or an acceptable alternative, you could put yourself at risk. You could be denied boarding if they can't confirm your identity at security checkpoint. You could face additional screenings, which could mean 30 or more minute delays, and you could miss your flight because of the additional screenings. Also, it could add legal complications and, more importantly, immigration complications if you're going through adjustment of status. If they can't confirm your identity, you're not traveling with a Real ID document or alternative, and they refer you over to immigration, then it could put you into immigration proceedings in some cases. So make sure if you are traveling inside the United States and you have that pending adjustment of status, either do so with a Real ID document, or you understand whether or not the documents that you are carrying are Real ID compliant, so you can avoid any issue traveling in the United States, and that you won't jeopardize that adjustment of status application that you have. If you have any other U.S. immigration law questions, we'd be glad to answer them for you. We only practice U.S. immigration law. And as far as Real ID goes into effect today, May 7th, 2025, make sure you're traveling with a Real ID compliant document. And if you don't have one, go out there and get it as soon as you can so that you can avoid any issues traveling internationally and domestically in the United States.